I told Secretary Cohen that I just could not pass up the chance of introducing the official who gave me the great honor and privilege of serving as Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Command back in 1999. So this is the host privilege, but that was really probably the least important thing that Secretary Cohen did for East Asia. He was a very strong steward of American policy in that region, laying down a foundation of relationships with all of the countries there, big and small, China, Japan, the smaller countries paid a great deal of attention to it. And since he has left official service, he has continued that interest and that involvement in a major way. If you ever went to see Secretary Cohen go to an airport, then you will meet him on his way to Japan, to Taiwan, to China, to many other places. So there couldn't be a better person who has seen the East Asia region, both from the official and very responsible position and from the private sector. He will be introducing our speaker this session and then leading the conversation with her. And without further ado, Secretary Cohen, over to you, sir.
Admiral, thank you very much. I might say a word in response to your generous comments. The first time I met Admiral Blair, we were having a conversation about international law. And having been at least trained as a lawyer many, many years ago, I thought I knew it pretty well. And I was about to say that we need to respond. No, we need to retaliate. And he said, not so gently, Mr. Secretary, under international law, we don't retaliate. We might respond, but we don't retaliate. Well, that was my first introduction to Admiral Blair. And notwithstanding that, I decided to remove him and save his life from the Joint Staff and recommend that he be appointed the then Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Forces, as such, PACCOM. And I did that for several reasons. Number one, because of his brilliance. And we like to have brilliant people running our military. But number two, the fact that he was willing to speak up to me as Secretary of Defense, first time he ever met me, and didn't hesitate and hold back. And those are the kinds of people that you really want to have working for you, that will bring and speak truth to power when it's necessary. Not too often, but on occasion. So with that, let me say good afternoon. And as all of you know, this marks the 70th anniversary, the end of World War II, and depending on how you count, the 25th anniversary at the end of the Cold War. And we've seen tremendous change and opportunity in the Asia-Pacific region, and it's been marked by great stability, growth and prosperity, expansion of representative and accountable governance. And the U.S.-Japan alliance has not only been the cornerstone and the anchor of this relationship, but it's been responsible for all of the things I just mentioned: peace, stability, prosperity. It's been this relationship responsible for that. And in the years following the end of the Cold War, the United States and Japan, we crafted an alliance to meet the needs of a new geopolitical situation, in part through the defense guidelines that give some substance to the architecture of the agreement. And then with the passage of the additional 18 years, the world has continued to change, and so the alliance has changed as well, and as has our overall bilateral relationship. And Prime Minister Abe, although I didn't hear his speech this morning, Admiral Blair was kind enough to give me a summary of what he said to the joint session of Congress. But he's talked before about the U.S.-Japan joint vision, how it's going to guide our relationship and growth for a global partnership. And to help set the tone for Prime Minister Abe's speech, who's going to be speaking to us later this afternoon, discussing Japan's global role within this global partnership, which is now described at this afternoon's session as America's security strategy in the Asia-Pacific. We are really fortunate today to have with us Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, Christine Wormuth. She is the leading architect of America's national security strategy and defense policy, and has been during the first and second Obama administrations. And I was delighted to have the good fortune to know Secretary Weymouth, I guess almost 2 decades.
Long time ago.
Long time ago. But she was a baby then. She was a rising star. During my tenure at the Pentagon, she was seen as a rising star, and her star has continued to soar even higher, as has her contribution to our national security policy. It was during the first term of the Obama administration that under Secretary Weymouth, she served as Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Defense Policy and Strategy on the NSC staff. She played a central role in developing President Obama's rebalance toward Asia-Pacific region. And then prior to becoming the Undersecretary, she served as Deputy Undersecretary for Strategy, Plans, and Force Development, and she was leading the drafting of the Department's 2014 QDR, the Quadrennial Defense Review, which is the principal document that really tries to provide a roadmap for future U.S. defense strategy and how we square that all and with our resources, available resources, I should say. And in the midst of that, somehow she's managed to also be in the private sector and raise a family. So, Christine, it's a privilege to introduce you today and to have you offer a few remarks about this new policy with Japan. And then you and I will have a short conversation after that. But welcome to the podium.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Secretary Cohen, for that very kind introduction. I'm very humbled and a little bit skeptical that Secretary Cohen even remembers me when I worked for him. But it was a great privilege. He was the second Secretary of Defense for whom I've worked. I think I'm now on number 7 with Secretary Carter. But it was a pleasure to work with Secretary Cohen those years ago. And even back then, his deep interest in and knowledge of Asia was very, very evident. And as Admiral Blair said, you know, subsequent to leaving government officially, Secretary Cohen has certainly remained very involved and is really one of the senior statesmen for the United States, I would argue, in terms of our relationships with Asia and the entire Asia-Pacific region. So very much privileged to be here with you today and to be able to talk to this great forum. It's terrific to look out and see all of the friends and colleagues from our think tank community, academic community. I know there are many representatives from business here and of course from Japan and elsewhere. So it's terrific in the middle of such an auspicious week to be able to come and talk with you all a little bit about the administration's rebalance policy. We're obviously tremendously pleased to be able to welcome Prime Minister Abe to Washington. As all of you know, we kicked off the week with, I think, a very productive 2+2 meeting up in New York. Secretary Carter was there with Secretary Kerry. We were able to sign the defense guidelines there. There were very productive meetings, as I understand, at the White House yesterday with the President. I know Minister Nakatani was seeing Secretary Carter yesterday afternoon. That was a follow-up to just a terrific set of meetings that Secretary Carter had with his counterpart in Japan a couple weeks ago. I think they very much hit it off. And so it's really just been, I think, a great week for U.S.-Japan relations. And it's been a good opportunity to highlight this alliance, which is so important and really stronger than it ever has been before. As many people, I think, have probably said today, this is obviously, this year is the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II. As I was thinking about that, my maternal grandfather, my mom's dad, was actually a veteran of World War II. He packed parachutes for our pilots who were flying in the Pacific Theater. And as a kid, I don't remember him talking about it very much, but I know it was obviously a central experience in his life. And the anniversary is an opportunity to commemorate the service and sacrifice of folks like my grandfather who helped bring an end to the war. But it's also, I think, a very positive opportunity to reflect on everything that's happened in the 70 years since. How much progress has been achieved by Japan in those years, but also really how much has been accomplished throughout the entire Asia-Pacific region. And looking at that, I would say the United States has played a very key role in ensuring the stability that's been needed for that progress. We've seen Japan, Taiwan, South Korea countries in Southwest Asia, and now, of course, China and India really rising and prospering in those decades. Millions of Asians have been lifted into the middle class. The region has been really relatively free of state-on-state conflict, and democracy has very much taken hold. And coming a little bit closer into the more recent past, we've obviously in the United States spent many of the last several years very focused on the Middle East. But part of the importance of the rebalance to Asia really is about making sure that the stability and security that we've had for so many decades can continue in the future, so that that progress that we've seen can also continue. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about why the rebalance is so important for the United States, and also sort of where we are in the rebalance process as we go into what some have called kind of the fourth quarter of the Obama administration. Security and prosperity go together, I think, very much. You need one to have the other. And for the last 7 decades, the U.S. has very much supported an international system based on international law. We've tried to help spread security, obviously, well beyond our shores. And our military, in particular, has underwritten that system in very significant ways by ensuring freedom of navigation and freedom of commerce. And nowhere really has that been more the case than in Asia, where freedom of commerce and enterprise has really transformed the region into a global driver of economic growth. When you look at the economies in Asia, most of them are growing, and as the world becomes increasingly more interconnected, the United States has a very deep and direct stake in that continuing prosperity. 5 years ago, the United States and Europe accounted for about 50% of the global middle class consumption, and Asia accounted for only about 20%. If you look 5 years ahead, the trend lines predict that the US and European share of global consumption will shrink to about 30%, while Asia's will rise to about 40%. And that trend is going to continue as Asia's very large middle class grows to about 2.7 billion consumers in the next 15 years. And it's trends like that that are a big part of why new trade agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership are so important. And I know that there have been discussions earlier today in depth about the TPP and its connection to security. But really, deeper trade relationships are not just about the economy. They also serve our broader strategic interests. Prosperity isn't just important for us and our own economy, but it also because it enables our allies and partners to spend more of their own resources on security. And I think Japan is very much an exemplar in this regard. Japan is currently the second largest contributor to the United Nations budget among all of the member states. Japan joined the very critical effort this summer in West Africa to combat Ebola. Japan provided over $173 million in financial assistance, as well as medical expertise and equipment. And that was really a crisis. I was at a meeting somewhere the other day, and people were reminding themselves that prior to our very significant intervention led by the United States last summer, the predictions for the number of deaths from Ebola were really projected to be over 1 million. And because of the effort that we spearheaded with tremendous support from the international community, happily the fatalities were much lower, and we really now have our arms around, I think, in a much more significant way, the outbreak and are driving that infection curve down close to zero. And getting back to Japan's efforts in terms of security, just this weekend with the terrible earthquake in Nepal, Japan has already sent a disaster search and rescue team and has also offered emergency supplies like tents and medical, again, equipment. Japan is also with us in the fight against ISIL and is part of the over 60-nation coalition to combat ISIL. And Japan in particular has provided $200 million in humanitarian assistance to try to help with the instability there. And I think when you look at so much of the world's population living in Asia with so many strong and growing economies in the region, with so many of the countries there having shared interests with us and shared challenges, there are many reasons why the rebalance is really a fundamental part of our foreign policy approach. With 2 years left in this administration, we're really at a critical stage, I think, in terms of our approach to Asia. The security equilibrium in the region is being tested by an increasingly confident and capable China. We're also facing a very combustible situation on the Korean Peninsula, something that we in the Department of Defense monitor very, very closely. And then, of course, there's unpredictable challenges that crop up, like natural disasters that sadly we've seen a number of in recent weeks, but also cyber attacks on our networks, on infrastructure, and then also the threat of violent extremists who are reaching out to try to connect to ISIL and ISIL affiliates in the region. So the work that we undertake in the next 2 years focused on the rebalance collectively as a government, but also as a broader policy community and as a set of international allies and partners, really is going to set the stage, I think, for the next few decades in what is clearly a critical region. Turning to sort of what we've been doing in the rebalance and where we are right now and what we're thinking about for the next 2 years, I see a handful of key lines of effort for us at the Department of Defense. First, we're very focused on strengthening our alliances and partnerships, which I think is a core strength that the United States has in the region. We're also updating our posture and presence in the region in some new and innovative ways. And then finally, we're very focused on investing in our capabilities, our technology capabilities, for example, but also our concepts, our operational concepts, and our contingency planning, which are all important pieces to support the platforms and munitions that we have. So turning to alliances and partnerships, while China has occasionally made the argument that our alliances are remnants of World War II and indicative of a Cold War mentality, I think our view is that while our alliances do have their roots in the World War II experience, they reflect the hard-won lessons that we learned there, lessons like like-minded nations needing to work together to protect global security and peace, hard lessons like learning to partner with our allies, and in so doing we can improve not just the world for ourselves in the United States, but also for the entire international community. Those alliances grew out of the World War II experience, but they are not by any means relics of the Cold War. They're very much about today and tomorrow and where we need to be going. And looking at where we are now and looking towards the future, as this audience knows very well, just on Monday, the United States and Japan signed a historic update to the defense guidelines. And I know you had a panel earlier today that talked about that in some detail, so I won't belabor it. But we believe that this new document will truly be significant in terms of what it means for the missions and capabilities of our alliance and what it can bring to the region, but also beyond, because as you all talked about, there aren't geographic limitations to the new set of guidelines as there have been in previous versions of the document. So that's a very significant step forward. Obviously, the hard part comes now in terms of implementing the guidelines and making sure that both we and Japan make the most of the advances that we've put down conceptually on paper. But we're confident that we're going to be doing that. Turning to South Korea, we're obviously working very closely with South Korea to make sure that we have the right kinds of capabilities to confront, as I said, a dangerous and evolving threat on the peninsula. And going farther, looking at Australia and the Philippines, last year we signed very important force posture agreements with both of those countries, and we think that's going to open really exciting new chapters with both of those alliance partners. I just got back actually a couple weeks ago from Australia and Singapore, and while I was in Australia, I was able to talk firsthand with about 20 Marine officers who were there as the leadership cadre of a much bigger 6-month deployment of over 1,000 Marines. And those Marines are going to be able to not just train and exercise with the Australian military, but also are going to be able to work a lot with other militaries in the region, which will be very beneficial. And we're not just looking at sort of our traditional bilateral engagements with allies, the sort of hub and spoke model that we've had for a long time. We're also looking at how can we network those alliances together and really build on some of the momentum we've seen behind some of the trilateral cooperation we've seen in the last couple of years. So for example, there we're trying to work with Japan and Australia to develop a set of cutting-edge new exercises. And we're also looking potentially at trilateral defense technology development, which would very much be a game changer for our alliances with those two countries. And then, as probably has been mentioned here earlier, together with South Korea and Japan, we've signed a first-of-kind trilateral information sharing arrangement. And in doing that, it will very much enable us to have real-time information sharing on North Korean nuclear and missile capabilities, and we'll be able to exchange that information much more freely among the three countries. Our friendships in the region extend beyond just our alliance countries as well to a whole bunch of new partnerships, and we're making a very deliberate strategic investment there in South and Southeast Asia. In Southeast Asia, we're building closer relationships with Vietnam, with Malaysia, and Singapore, each of whom are taking on serious new roles in terms of important issues like counterterrorism, maritime security, and peacekeeping. And the importance of Southeast Asia, I think, for us is underscored by the fact that every Secretary of Defense in the Obama administration has gone to the Shangri-La dialogue. And Secretary Carter will continue that trend when he goes to the Shangri-La dialogue in a couple of weeks in May. And he's very much looking forward to that, and I can tell you by the amount of staff activity, I think it's going to be a very fruitful conversation with his counterparts there. We're also working on strengthening our defense relationship with ASEAN. You know, we had a U.S.-ASEAN Defense Forum last year. We're looking forward to continuing to build on that. And we are placing a lot of focus in the next 2 years on the central role that we think ASEAN can play. And we want to work closely with ASEAN as it works in the many different issue areas that the member countries are working on. And finally, in the vein of alliances and partnerships, many folks in the broader policy community have been talking not just about the Asia-Pacific, but also the Indo-Pacific. And in that vein, the U.S.-India relationship is really one of the most dynamic and exciting partnerships we have, especially under the new leadership of Prime Minister Modi. In January, when President Obama went out for Republic Day, we finalized a historic 10-year bilateral defense framework that's going to open up new opportunities in a number of areas. We also have been working on developing new co-production and co-development projects under the umbrella of the Defense Technology and Trade Initiative. We have a handful of very specific projects that we've gotten pretty far down the road on with India, and we're also looking forward to exploring some other areas, perhaps in the area of aircraft carrier cooperation. So we think there's a lot of potential there. So when we look at the relationships that we have with allies and partners in the region, they're really central to our ability to continue to try to enable stability in the region. And we're very energized by the steps we've taken in the last couple of years and think there's a lot more productive work that can be done. Another important part, though, of the rebalance is adapting our defense posture in the region to be geographically distributed, operationally resilient, and politically sustainable. And to give you some examples of how we're trying to do that, one very concrete example, no pun intended, is the construction that we have underway in the Asia-Pacific. In Japan, Korea, and Guam, we're in the middle of 4 of the largest military construction projects since the end of the Cold War. And I think it's also worth mentioning that Japan and Korea are very much paying their fair share of that construction, which is incredibly helpful and very helpful to us as we talk to Congress to maintain support for those MILCON projects. We're also trying to be smarter about how we manage our personnel and platforms in the region. This gets to a lot of the political sustainability point. We're shifting some of our Marines from their concentrated presence on Okinawa to Australia, Hawaii, and Guam, as well as mainland Japan. And we think that will, again, allow us to continue our presence there in a more sustainable way. The new agreements that we signed with Australia and the Philippines that I mentioned, they are again enabling us to rotate forces into the region in ways that we haven't been able to do before. And those forces are going to be able to train, exercise, and operate together with a whole variety of militaries in the region. And some of that will be facilitated by the littoral combat ships, for example, in Singapore. But we're looking at creative ways to get the most out of those rotational deployments. And in June, the Army is actually going to be rotating in a brigade combat team for the first rotation to Korea. And doing this, having a rotational deployment of the brigade combat team will actually make sure that we're bringing in forces at a higher level of readiness than we've been doing previously, which will be critical given the security environment on the peninsula. The last major line of the rebalance that's really important for us at Defense is ensuring that we continue to invest in future capabilities that are going to be relevant to the operational challenges we see in the Asia-Pacific theater. These include a lot of high-end capabilities like the new long-range stealth bomber and a new long-range anti-ship cruise missile, just to name two. And also, frankly, kind of less sexy things, but very important things like investing in rapid runway repair capabilities, which are key to, again, that operationally resilient posture that we need to be able to have in the region. We're also working on new weapons, for example, like the railgun, which uses electromagnetic forces rather than high explosives to fire rounds at a much higher speed, at lower cost, and with greater effectiveness than some other platforms we've used in the past. And as Secretary Carter and Deputy Secretary Work have both noted, we're also developing new capabilities for space, electronic warfare, and some other advanced capabilities, including some surprising new capabilities. So as we've gotten a few years into the rebalance, coming from the Defense Strategic Guidance in 2012 and President Obama's speech in Australia, we're now actually fielding some of those key capabilities that we've been developing over the last 10 years and are bringing them into theater. We've sent the latest Virginia-class submarine, for example, and the Navy's P-8 surveillance aircraft. We're deploying our most advanced fighters to the region, like the F-22 and the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, as well as our long-range B-2 and B-52 bombers. And given the region's growing missile threat, we're also forward deploying 2 additional Aegis missile defense-equipped ships. We're also finding new ways to try to use the existing weapon systems that we have more effectively. For example, we've adapted the Tomahawk missile, best known for use against fixed land-based targets when we were in the first Gulf War. We've adapted that so it can be used against moving targets in a maritime environment, which is obviously critical when you're thinking about the Asia-Pacific. And finally, we're not just focused on things, on technology, weapons, platforms, and munitions. We're also digging deep to try to rethink our operational concepts and make sure that our contingency plans really reflect creative thinking, that they reflect a sober understanding of the operational challenges we face in the Asia-Pacific theater, among other things, the incredible distances that we're facing for projecting power, and also a realistic perspective on available resources and timelines, which is not something, frankly, that our war plans have always done particularly well. When we step back from all of the specifics and step back from the lines of effort, I am frequently, whether I'm testifying in front of Congress or talking to groups like this, I'm frequently asked, isn't the rebalance really about containing China? And I think it's important to note, as President Obama said a couple of weeks ago, actually when he was in Jamaica, of all places, we should welcome the peaceful rise of China. We have a lot more to gain from a healthy, outward-looking China than we do from a weaker China that is preoccupied with internal security concerns. We're not allies with China, but we don't have to be adversaries. A strong and constructive U.S.-China relationship is really essential for global prosperity and security. But our relationship is complex, obviously, as we try to work through how to cooperate and how we manage some of the differences that we have. There are opportunities, I think, to improve understanding and to reduce risk with China. And that's one of the reasons why President Obama and President Xi announced 2 historic confidence-building measures just this past fall. And my team at the Defense Department, which was led by Ambassador Scheer, who I think spoke to this audience earlier, they really played a key role in developing those confidence-building measures with the Chinese. And I think one of the most important things about that is that it was really as much of the value of those confidence-building measures was as much about the process of discussing the issues with the Chinese as it was about the actual substance of the agreement. But we're actually working with the Chinese now to complete another measure this year that will try to prevent dangerous air-to-air encounters. So we're building on the 2 mechanisms that we've already come to agreement on and are working on a third. And I think there are other areas where we can probably also build similar types of confidence-building measures. But even as we work, obviously, on building transparency between the United States and China, China does continue to undertake activities that leave its neighbors and us concerned about its true intentions in the region. And I think this is illustrated by, for example, its relatively opaque but growing defense budget, China's actions in cyberspace, and also, of course, its behavior in the East and South China Seas. We're concerned about those kinds of behaviors because it appears that China is not always interested in abiding by international norms and rules. And I think, in particular, China's land reclamation activities are particularly concerning to us because they are providing China the ability to upgrade its military presence in the South China Sea. And if China continues to militarize its outposts, other claimants, and there are many claimants, obviously, many disputes in that area, who may follow suit, which in turn can increase the potential for a miscalculation or crisis in the region. We're very concerned about that. We've been talking to China about it very directly. We've been urging China to refrain from activities in disputed waters that could complicate that situation. And in fact, several years ago, China and ASEAN concluded an agreement that specifically said the parties would not undertake activities that were escalating. And I think it's precisely that kind of, the activity right now, we believe, does have the potential to escalate the situation and to further kind of muddy the waters of the disputes. We've also encouraged China to help create transparency by clarifying the nature of the 9-line claim, for example, which we think would help build trust with its neighbors. But even as we seek to manage these differences, we are continuing to work to find and expand areas where we can cooperate, where our interests do overlap. And opportunities like the strategic and economic dialogue coming up this summer, as well as President Xi Jinping's visit in September, will provide opportunities to identify those areas, to showcase the maturity and strength of the relationship, as well as the complexity of our relationship. So I think with all of that, it's clear we're at a critical point when we look at the Asia region. The security environment's very dynamic, in many ways very challenging, but at the same time, our alliances and partnerships have never been stronger. And again, the activities here in Washington this week, I think, very much underscore that. We're fortunate to have the opportunity of Prime Minister Abe's visit to remind us of all of the dimensions of our relationships with the countries in Asia. There are historical dimensions, the worst of times, but also the best of times. We have cultural dimensions with those countries, to include my favorite aspect of culture, which is food. There are economic and trade dimensions, science and technology dimensions. Yesterday at the lunch at the State Department, Vice President Biden noted the incredible technological feat of Japan's latest high-speed train. And of course, there are the diplomatic and security dimensions of those relationships. Secretary Carter is very focused on making the most of those relationships, making the most of the next 2 years, and doing as much as he can to advance the rebalance agenda, recognizing that what we're doing in the Department of Defense is just one piece of the broader rebalance to Asia Pacific. I hope that gave you a sense of how we see the rebalance from the Department of Defense. Again, very much appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all, and looking forward to the conversation with Secretary Cohen and all of you.
As I suspected, you were going to leave very little for me to pose questions to you. But let me try and be a little bit of a devil's advocate here. As I understand it, this rebalancing, it used to be called pivot, but the rebalancing includes having some Marines deployed on a rotational basis, at least initially in Darwin, in Australia, running littoral combat ships through Singapore, 4 approximately, rebuilding our relationship with the Philippines, making it stronger, strengthening our relationship with Japan in terms of the new defense guidelines, really strengthening our relationship with India, and taking together all of this seems, at least to the Chinese, to say, wait a minute, you really are trying to contain us. So what is the message that you give to the Chinese at this point, saying this really is simply an effort to strengthen the relationships between democracies in the region, and to make sure any power, any rising power, uses that in a way that's peaceful and according to international norms. How do you persuade the Chinese from your position that our interests really are benign in terms of toward them and not seen as an encirclement and an attempt to contain what they feel is their rightful place in history?
That's a great question, and I think we have this conversation with the Chinese all the time, and I think I tried to lay it out in my remarks. I mean, I think fundamentally one of the biggest reasons for the rebalance from the United States point of view is to try to continue, if you will, to keep the foundation of stability so that we can enable the economic prosperity to continue, which benefits China, which benefits other countries in the region, and which benefits the United States. So it's security in the service of economic prosperity, which benefits all in the region. And I think that's so. I would try to frame it, and we do try to frame it to the Chinese as, here is the very self-interested but positive and non-containing reason why the United States is focused on this. And again, our relationships with countries in the region we've had for many, many, many years, and they have benefits for both the United States and countries in the region. But they are fundamentally about trying to continue to support the system of international norms, international rules that are sort of grounded in the international law, which benefits all participants to the process and to the system. So I think but clearly the Chinese don't always see it that way. And I think part of what we have to do is just continue to be transparent with them, continue to be direct with them, continue to find the areas where we can cooperate, but be also very clear with them about the areas where we have disagreements. And I think some of perhaps convincing them ultimately will be about persistence and being consistent over time in how we talk about what we're trying to do.
Is our policy reactive? In other words, we don't have a long-range game plan that we're implementing regardless of what they do, but rather it's in response to what they do. If they're putting S-400s that they're acquiring from the Russians in China, if they are continuing to build these new islands that can be used for platforms for takeoff and landings and naval operations. And then we respond to that. So it's one of those, if you go this way, we are matching it. So we're kind of going up the scale depending on what they do. Or do we have a game plan? This is what we intend to do regardless of what the Chinese have in mind.
Mm-hmm. We have a game plan, and the game plan, again, is I think to try to continue to have the kind of stability we've had in the region that's been so beneficial for everyone in the region. And part of why that stability has been successful is that people have generally behaved in accordance to the international norms and rules. So I think our end game is to want to continue to facilitate a environment where if people are acting in a way that's consistent with the international system, it's beneficial. I think we certainly have no desire to get into an arms race or to facilitate a broader arms race in the region. That's a cost-imposing strategy that certainly doesn't benefit the United States. I think within that game plan of wanting to try to continue to have stability in the region, there may be specific activities that we are going to react to, again, to try to reassure allies and partners in the region and to, again, make sure that there's a credible deterrent posture. So I certainly think we'll want to make adjustments as we go, but we do have a game plan. And again, it's, I think, to continue a system that's been very beneficial for decades.
There's an expression that's been used that says that amateurs study policy, strategic policy.
And experts study logistics.
Budgets. So let's talk about the budget. As we talk about this rebalancing, let's look at what you're working with or what the administration is working with in order to reassure all of our allies And I say this in the context because Admiral Blair was able to give me very quickly a summary of Prime Minister Abe's speech. But I noticed in the long version, I just start quickly, he said he was very impressed with Carole King. Carole King's song, "When you're down and weary, down and out, you've got a friend, I'll be there." And that's I'm kind of messing the lyrics up. But he's saying that the United States will be there. Basically, that has been his notion. But there are a lot of folks in the region who look at our budgets and say, wait a minute, we're not so sure you're going to be there. And we've seen what is taking place in the Middle East and areas where you seem to be disengaging. And this all sounds good. But what are you doing really to make sure that everybody understands that we are going to be there? We're going to be their friend that they can count on? Or is there some remnant of skepticism that the United States is kind of coming back home, that we're dealing with our own nation building at home, as some like to call it, that we've got a deteriorating infrastructure? We talked about the wonderful trains they have in Japan. We don't have them, et cetera. So how do we send the signal when you look at the budgets that this rebalancing is a reality?
Great question, and I think something that I hear often when talking to audiences about this issue. First, I think the proof is in the pudding. You know, even as let me see if I can get the numbers right on this. We have taken out, when you look at what the Department of Defense planned to have in its budget going back to 2012, we have actually had to take out $700 billion out of our defense plan, meaning, again, what we thought we were going to have to spend, both as part of our own internal effort to get our fiscal house in order, but also because of the Budget Control Act and the variety of, the budget to and fro we've had with Congress. But even as we have navigated the process of managing the Department of Defense budget, we have preserved the resources to make sure that we could do all of the things that I was just walking through. F-22s, F-35s to the region, the 4 littoral combat ships in Singapore by 2017. We're investing in things like the Virginia payload module, which will allow us to have greater capacity on our attack submarines. We are making sure that we have the resources to send the Marines to Darwin to do the dispersal posture that we need to have. We have made it a priority, even as we have managed greater scarcity, certainly, than the department was used to in the last decade. And we have made it a priority to fund the rebalance. Because, again, I think, the logic behind why do the rebalance is about our prosperity and our security. So this is something where we have a self-interest, and because of that, we have made it a priority to protect those resources. But clearly, with all of the talk of budget cuts and sequestration, it's not surprising to me that countries in the region wonder, will we be there? But again, I would say, look at our record. And even when sequestration was actually in effect in 2013, and we did have to go in and open up the budget and pull things out of it, in real time, actually, Secretary Carter, who was then the Deputy Secretary, led the process to do that, and he again made sure that we protected to the greatest degree possible things that we thought supported the rebalance. So we had to cancel exercises that year. We did not cancel exercises in Asia because they were so important. So I think we are very much able to walk and chew gum even as we deal with crises in the Middle East, and certainly there's no shortage of those. That said, if sequestration comes back, we will have challenges. And this is part of what we've tried to underscore, particularly when we talk to Congress, is there will be real consequences if we do not find a solution to sequestration, because then we will have to go in and look at how do we make ends meet. And we don't want to do that. It's not in the interests of U.S. security. So that is, the very reason why it's just essential that the executive branch and Congress find a way to solve sequestration once and for all and give us some budget stability.
You mentioned rail guns, lasers, other new technologies. Anything in the works of unmanned systems, either both air and naval?
Certainly can't say a whole lot about that in this audience, in this kind of a forum, but yes, we are very much, I think, of the view that unmanned platforms are a significant part of what we need to have in the future. And we are looking at, there's obviously the department is looking at an unmanned aerial system to come off of aircraft carriers. That is something that we've been looking at very carefully in terms of what are the precise requirements that we need, but there's certainly a recognition that we need that some kind of a system, and that would be applicable, I think, very much to Asia-Pacific. And one of the areas where we have a very strong comparative advantage is in undersea warfare. We continue to have that advantage. And again, I think unmanned underwater vehicles is going to be a part of that capability set as well.
And you talked about the kind of trilateral cooperation now between the United States, Japan, and Australia. Is there any challenge involved in terms of making sure the release of information in terms of end-use protection of classified information, SISMOA and other things? Is that a challenge now on a trilateral basis with U.S. technology going into these new platforms or Japanese technology coming into the U.S.? Mm-hmm.
It's certainly not going to be an insurmountable challenge. I think, when it comes to our technology and our technology security, we're always going to look at it very, very closely. But the fact that we've signed the trilateral information sharing agreement, for example, with Japan and Korea, I think is a sign of the increased confidence we have in terms of doing information sharing. And when we look to Australia and some of the work we'd like to do with them, and perhaps, they're looking at a submarine acquisition and trying to sort through where that's going to land, I think there are going to be ways that we're going to be able to make that work.
In the past, we have argued to the Russians that a potential nuclear-armed Iran is as great a threat to them as it is to us or to the region. And they have been at least cooperative in trying to, in imposing sanctions to try and dissuade Iran from going in that direction. Question comes up in terms of whether or not the Chinese have been as concerned with North Korea's development of nuclear weapons as they need to be. For example, they've suggested we may have exaggerated North Korea's capability, and yet just, I think, last week, there's a report coming from the Chinese that we've underestimated what North Korea has. They may have as many as 20 nuclear weapons at this point, with a capacity to develop as many as 8 to 10 a year. And so the question becomes, we've always assumed that China would have more control or more influence over North Korea than anyone else. But now it appears maybe the North Koreans are having more influence in terms of China.
I would say, Secretary Cohen, I think it may be that China does not have as much influence on North Korea as it has had with Kim Jong-un, who is an unpredictable actor, certainly at times. China may not have quite as much influence as they've had, but they still have a tremendous amount of influence, something we talk about frequently with them. And while we don't always agree on sort of the causal dynamics of the situation on the peninsula, I think the Chinese have been helpful in talking to North Korea and expressing their strong concerns about the potential North Korean nuclear weapons program. So we actually have had a pretty constructive dialogue with the Chinese there. But I think what you're outlining is indicative of the very combustible situation we have on the peninsula. And because we have limited visibility into that, we are, in addition to trying to work diplomatically with the Chinese and others, are also very much investing in our capabilities to try to address the potential North Korean threat. We've increased the number of ground-based interceptors in our national missile defense system. We're increasing it from 30 to 44. We're very much focused on how to solve potentially the mobile missile, intercontinental ballistic missile threat, which is a very hard challenge. But part of what we have to do is invest in the capabilities, given that there may be limitations to what the diplomatic tools can do.
And I'm told that President Putin, President Xi Jinping is going to be visiting Moscow, and that President Putin is also inviting Kim Jong-un Is that something we should be concerned about, that this is an attempt to have sort of a trilateral relationship between North Korea, Russia, and China?
Well, you know, I think obviously we don't see eye to eye with Russia on any number of things right now. I'm aware of some of the discussions of some of those visits. And I think it's, given the level of isolation that Russia, I think, is experiencing right now, it's not surprising that they are reaching out, I think, to try to develop alternatives to some of the relationships that they've had with the United States and countries in NATO. So, you know, we'll watch that carefully. I'm not sure, you know, I don't think there's, I'm not sure we're sort of seeing a trilateral condominium coming, but it's something to watch.
And is there any pressure, additional pressure on the United States to get back to the six-party talks now at this point, with a revelation that North Korea has more than we estimated at the time of nuclear capability?
I think, I mean, again, in our assessment, you know, we are very much of the view that to re-engage in talks, the North Koreans really need to meet a set of preconditions that we've outlined and that we've talked through with them a number of times. They do not seem to indicate a willingness to meet any of those. So I don't see a groundswell of momentum to try to restart negotiations with the statements China has made. But certainly we are always in a dialogue with all of the partners diplomatically to try to get negotiations restarted. But we want to do it in a way that makes sense and that's going to be a good use of our time. And right now I don't think we see the intent on the other side.
I'm looking at Admiral Blair. He said he was going to get the hook for me if I went over 130, and I think I'm a little bit over 130. But thank you so much for a tremendous presentation to the group. It really very informative.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. Good to see you again.